As Halloween approaches, many of us find ourselves thinking back to all of our favourite scary stories and urban legends. A perennial favourite among these tales is the pervasive fear of the misty haunted cemetery. Cemeteries are feared and avoided, often for good reason. Not only are they solemn places where lost loved ones rest, but they are also the final resting place of many troubled souls. Lives ended too early or in dire and disheartening circumstances are intermingled with those deceased from natural causes. So it's only natural for such a place to give most people a sense of unease. Some cemeteries seem to have had a more troubled history than others, or simply have been around for much longer, and as a result have given rise to legends and stories about hauntings and curses. In today's video, we'll be looking at some of those cemeteries that have, over the years, accumulated multiple reports of strange activity and can be called truly haunted. So as always, sit back, hit those lights, and enjoy. The Rockwood Cemetery and Necropolis in Sydney, Australia. The Rockwood Necropolis holds the dubious honour of being the largest cemetery in the Southern Hemisphere, housing the mortal remains of over 1 million people. It's difficult to underestimate how large this necropolis, or City of the Dead, is, having an area larger than the actual city of Sydney. Rockwood has seen its fair share of suffering souls and strange occurrences. Some victims from the sinking of the Titanic have their final resting place in this cemetery, and rumours are abound that their drowning sobs can still be heard bouncing off of the tombstones. The infamous murderer, robber and fraudster, who is known as Australia's first gangster, John Chow Hayes, is buried in this necropolis, with some visitors reporting the sounds of gunshots and laughter behind them when near his grave. The broad range and sheer quantity of people buried here makes for nearly an unlimited amount of stories and rumours. It is said that deep in the cemetery one can find devil chairs, on which one can make sacrifice and summon the devil in order to make an exchange with him at the cost of your immortal soul. This massive necropolis is not only one of the world's largest, but it is still in use, and has the potential to keep on generating rumours and reports for the foreseeable future. Have any of you visited here? The Camp Chase Confederate Cemetery in Columbus, Ohio. Camp Chase was an American Civil War training and prison camp established in May 1861. Upwards of 150,000 Union soldiers and 25,000 Confederate prisoners passed through its gates between 1861 and 1865. By the end of the American Civil War, more than 2,200 Confederate prisoners died and were buried in the camp. Their deaths were largely due to the poor conditions in their prison. Lack of hygiene and clean latrines, coupled with chronic food shortages, left the prisoners in terrible suffering. While the training camp was dismantled in the aftermath of the war, the cemetery has remained to this day. This cemetery is known for various average ghost sightings, but one apparition stands out from the rest. Having been reported by various people since the end of the 1800s, she is called the Lady in Grey, and is said to be a young, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s, dressed entirely in grey and carrying a clean white handkerchief. She is known to walk through the cemetery, quietly sweeping and trying to read the names of the gravestones, believed to be in search of a loved lost one to the war. Visitors regularly see her wandering and searching before vanishing from sight. One time in 1988, during a Civil War reenactment that took place nearby, many people reported hearing the mournful weeping of a woman. The sound pierced through the sounds of the reenactment, but stopped after a few minutes, with no source ever being identified. It's no surprise that a war as brutal and historically divisive as the US Civil War would generate lost spirits that still wander heartbroken and lost to this day. Howard Street Cemetery, Salem, Massachusetts. Salem, Massachusetts has a well-earned dark reputation as the place in which one of the United States' most notorious witch trials took place. At the start of these trials, in the spring of 1692, a group of women accused local farmer Giles Corey, and then later his wife Martha, of witchcraft. Corey asserted that he was not guilty, but rejected a trial, correctly believing that the court was biased against him and would never declare him innocent. After his death sentence was passed, Corey was crushed to death over the course of 3 days. During the execution, the entire village watched on as though it was a spectacle. Corey was then buried in a grave in what is now Howard Street Cemetery, near the site of his execution. Since his death, it is rumoured that his spirit haunts the town. According to a local legend, the ghost of Giles Corey is known to appear and wander around the graveyard whenever a disaster is about to strike Salem. Most notably, he was said to have appeared the night before the Great Salem Fire of 1914, which destroyed much of the town. The position of Sheriff of Essex County is also said to suffer from Corey's post-mortem curse, as the holders of that office, including the sheriff who condemned Corey, had either died or resigned as a result of heart or blood ailments. Giles's wife Martha was hanged 3 days after his death, accused in the same way that Giles was. Martha was also buried in the cemetery and is said to lead visitors in circles around the cemetery in an effort to make them disorientated and lose their way. It is said that these two unhappy spirits still appear to this very day, though the curse of the sheriff was thought to be broken in the 1990s when the office was moved to a new location. We'd love to know if any of you have visited Howard Street Cemetery and had any experiences there. The South Park Cemetery in West Bengal, India. One of the largest non-church Christian cemeteries outside of Europe and the Americas is the South Park Cemetery in Kolkata, India, and it's well known for being a spooky and strange place. While no longer in use today, this cemetery remains protected in India as a heritage site. Opened in 1767 and used actively until the 1830s, this 8-acre cemetery is enclosed by a high brick wall, which protects the mix of tombs, monuments and mausoleums. The nearly 1,900 graves are of all sorts of varying styles and designs, ranging from European Gothic and Classical to Indo-Iranian and Indo-Arabic styles, made all the more haunting by the fact many of the graves are marked for people who were in their early 20s and younger. These mixed styles are all jumbled together in a veritable maze of obelisks, cairns, urns, and statuary. Further adding to the spooky atmosphere is the plant life that has slowly been taking over the site. Green mosses and prehistoric ferns cover much of the grounds and work to make the cemetery even spookier than it would have otherwise been. There are a large variety of reports coming from those who have been to the cemetery of strange and otherworldly occurrences. Many people report getting lost and losing time in the cemetery, as well as feeling dizzy and breathless. Some say that they captured strange-looking structures on their cameras. Others still report the sounds of instruments playing, a ghostly lament for all the premature deaths that found their eternal resting place in this cemetery. One of the creepiest stories is that of the Bleeding Tomb. Deep in the undergrowth of the cemetery, there is a small pyramid-shaped tomb that is rumoured to ooze a blood-like substance during monsoons. The half-forgotten memorial belonged to a family called the Dennison family, all of whom are said to have died within weeks of each other for reasons not recorded. This bleeding tomb, as well as the other creepy features of this historical cemetery, make it one of the world's most haunted, and definitely one of India's most haunted cemeteries. Wadi AlSalam Cemetery in Iraq. For many Shia Muslims across the globe, Wadi AlSalam, or Valley of Peace, in south of Baghdad, is among the highest coveted final resting places, perhaps only behind the shrine of Imam Ali. Being the largest cemetery in the world, it is easy to imagine that this place would be very haunted. Among the 5 million Muslims buried in the graveyard are victims of Iraq's wars, disasters and plagues over the last 14,000 years. And it is said by the very workers who make their living at the cemetery that these souls are not only restless, but often hostile. One former gravedigger described an odd creature called Gorilla that the locals believe inhabits the graveyard. He said of the creature, "One day a shadow sneaked up behind me and hit my head violently, leaving me badly injured. I no longer walk straight and feel like the ghost still haunts my body." His family has spent thousands of dollars on various treatments, but he still claims to be weighed down by a dark presence. Another gravedigger reported burying a woman in her tomb, only to turn around and feel her hand slap him harshly across the face, leaving him petrified. There is a high rate of turnover of undertakers and groundskeepers at the cemetery, who regularly face mental health issues, such as depression, mania, and suicidal ideation, after working at the cemetery. With this cemetery seeing as many as 200 burials a day during the peak of the American-Iraq War, with those numbers skyrocketing to anywhere between 300 and 600 burials a day. This cemetery is saturated with suffering and fear. A gravesite with this much history and tragedy behind it, stretching even as far back as the close of Sassanid rule of the area, is bound to be full of restless and haunted spirits. If any of you have ever visited and have your own stories to tell, please let us know in the comments section. So that's 5 of the most haunted cemeteries in the world. We hope you've enjoyed, and as always, we'll see you tomorrow for another creepy video.